This is a video tutorial on making selections in Photoshop. Okay, so you've already downloaded Making Selections Start Flat.psd. So we're going to open this up. If you have Photoshop opened already with fresh preferences, that's okay, leave it open. If you have not opened up Photoshop yet, what we're going to do is start it with fresh preferences, but by opening up this document. So if you hold down your Shift, Option, and Control if you're on a PC, or Command on a Mac, hold those three keys down while double clicking on this icon, you will get the same dialog box. Go ahead and say yes. This tutorial was created for Adobe Photoshop 2020. You will be working on a newer version. Some aspects of the file that you've received are different than what is in this video. The carets are missing from your file. There will be instructions on how to import this file. Okay, I'm going to just do my usual setting up my workspace. If I already have it in my workspaces, go ahead and select it. Okay, so here we have a bunch of objects that appear to be on separate layers, but they are all on one background layer. So what we're going to do is select each object and place it into the crate. Now we're going to look at this as if it is a true 3D object, which it was. I took pictures of each one of these objects, and you can notice that the shadow from the side of this box is hitting over here, which means the light is coming from this direction. It's shining on this wall. So when we place our objects, we want to make sure that we are casting a shadow. So we won't put this directly on top of this circle, for instance. We will offset it a little bit. All right, I should make this bigger so we can all see. So I just did a Command 0 to enlarge the screen. All right, so there are a couple things that I set up as soon as I start up Photoshop, and it's up to you whether you want to set these things up or not. But one thing I do is I go to the Zoom tool and I turn off Scrubby Zoom because I don't like to work in that way, but you can leave it on if you wish. And then I also go to the View menu and I select Rulers. So now you can see along the top I have rulers. Now currently they are marking in pixels. You can also change this in your Photoshop preferences in units and rulers. And I'll change my rulers from pixels to inches. And say OK. So now you can see that my rulers are in traditional standard measure. Now rulers are helpful in that I'm not actually going to be measuring anything, but I will be using the rulers to get something called guides. And guides allow us to align objects or selections to the guide. I'm going to change back over to my marquee tool here, which is the rectangular marquee tool. That is not necessary. You don't have to switch to that. I'm just more comfortable using that tool. And I'm bringing my cursor up into the ruler and I'm clicking, holding down and dragging. And I'm looking for this guide to align to the top of this circle. And so I'm looking real closely at it, but it's just a little too difficult for me to see if that's really aligned to it. So what I'm going to do is hold down my space bar so I get the hand tool, and then also hold down the Command key or the Control key on a PC. I am on Mac, and zoom in on this object to see if it's really truly attached. If it's not, I'm going to grab the Move tool, hover over it, and I can move it out of the way and see if I'm really at the very edge. I'm also going to grab a guide from the vertical ruler, and to do that I hold my cursor in the ruler, click and drag to the right, and release, and make adjustments as necessary. Okay, so to select this object or this grouping of pixels, that's what we're looking at. Let me zoom in here so you can really see the pixels. So that's what's making up this image. Let me zoom back out. I want to select it, and it's a round object. So when I make selections, I want to consider what kind of tools make the kind of selections I need to make, and I do need to make a round selection. The tool that allows you to make round selections is called the Elliptical Marquee. And to select the Elliptical Marquee tool, you click and hold down on the Rectangular Marquee tool, and you'll find the Elliptical Marquee tool, and go ahead and release it on that. And now that is the active tool. You can see it up in the options bar. So I'm going to bring my cursor to where my two guides meet, and I'm going to click and drag from that corner to the imaginary corner where this circle might end. And I'm looking at these little dancing ants or marching ants, and I'm looking to see how to adjust it. So now I'm pulling my cursor or my mouse up, and if I look at the edges of where that circle is meeting it, or my marquee is meeting the circle, I can make adjustments. Or if I pull it more to the left and then pull it more to the right, I can see where I'm going to place it. Now, let's say you do something like you pull it out here and you drop it. All right, that's fine. That's perfectly okay. To deselect an object, click anywhere outside of the dancing ants, and it's deselected. That's the easiest way. The keyboard shortcut is also Command D for deselect, or you can get it from the select menu, deselect. I have nothing selected, so I can't select that option right now. Okay, now let's say you don't really start from the corner, and you start from like here, and you start to drag your cursor out. Now I'm clearly not aligned to where I want to be, but I'm still holding my mouse button down. And if I hold down the space bar at the same time as holding down my mouse button, I can move it to where I want to go. So I'm moving it up to here. I'm releasing the space bar, not my mouse button, and I'm going to continue to draw out, hold down my space bar again, and I'm going to drag that up. So I welcome you to attempt to do all these selection methods. You can pause and play this video as needed. Once you have this selected, we're going to be moving it to a location inside the crate, but I can't see it right now because I am zoomed in so much. So I'm going to open up in the window menu the navigator. Now the navigator allows me to zoom in and zoom out on objects. So right now this red rectangle is demonstrating where my rulers are and where my scroll bars are on my left and right. So if I move my scroll bars, you can see that it moves. So I'm going to zoom out of this. To do that, I can move this slider outward, or I could use the zoom tool to zoom in. I can use the options bar to zoom out. If I have the zoom in tool selected and I hold down the options key, it becomes the zoom out. So whichever method you choose, go ahead and make it so that you can see both objects. So I'm going to put a lasso around these two objects to make it so that I can see both objects. And now I want to move this object to this space. To do that, I'm going to go to the toolbar and select the Move tool. And then when I bring the cursor out, you can see that it becomes this like an upside down V shape, but we call that a caret, and it has a crosshair next to it. That's the Move tool icon. If I bring my cursor inside the object, the caret stays, but indicating that it's selecting something, and the scissors mean I'm going to be cutting it away from the layer. When I click and hold down and start to drag, it allows me to move the object. I'm going to offset this and then deselect. Okay, I've zoomed back out and now I want to move these guides out of the way because the next thing I want to select is this orange. And to do that, using the Move tool, hover over your guide and click and drag it back into the ruler that it came from. The next object we will be selecting is this orange. So go ahead and zoom in on this object. The center of the object is already marked for you. And what we're going to be doing is using the Elliptical Marquee tool. Select the Elliptical Marquee tool again. This time, instead of drawing from an imaginary corner or some guide set up at the corner of this object, we're going to draw our circle from the center of this orange. So place your crosshair in the center of the orange and click and hold down your mouse and drag diagonally. As you're doing that, now hold down your Option or Alt key, and you'll see that your circle is now drawing out from the center. Now, it can be an oval, but if you hold down also the Shift key, it will constrain it to a perfect circle. So go ahead and make a circular selection of the orange. It doesn't have to be right at the very edge. And release your mouse button and then your modifier keys. Zoom out so that you can see the orange and its shadow. My navigator is in the way, so I'm just going to shrink it up a little bit. Grab my Move tool, but this time I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, which is V, like the letter V in Victoria. And I will click and drag it over to the orange shadow and deselect. Go to the Select menu and choose Deselect. Next, we will make a new layer. Currently, we only have one layer. We're going to make a new layer and place this egg on this plate. So we're going to zoom in on this object, and we will use the Magnetic Lasso tool. If we go over to the toolbar and click and hold down at the Lasso tool, you will see a tool called the Magnetic Lasso tool. Select that. The way the Magnetic Lasso tool works is that it sees a contrast of colors when you click. So let's say between this area and this area, these two colors are very different than each other. If I click my mouse and I release the mouse, but I move my cursor, it acts as a magnet to the edge of that defined contrast. Go slowly and make sure it gets every area. Sometimes this happens and you don't know what to do. In that case, the best option is to either go back to the first place you clicked and click, or double click and then deselect and start again. If you make a mistake like this or like this, I will show you a way to fix that. But just keep going around the egg shape until you're back at the beginning. And then click to complete. This icon of a little circle will show up when you are completing the path. Pause so that you can complete this part. Continue when you're done. To fix areas like this and like this, we have to consider what is currently selected. So right now, this area within the dancing ants is what is selected. I want to add this area to my selection. To do that, I'm going to go to the Lasso tool flyout and select the regular Lasso tool. When I bring the Lasso tool out to an area, it has the Move tool indicated and also a lasso. When I am going to add to a selection, I hold down my Shift key and I get this plus sign. That means I will be adding those pixels to the area. Now I want to add these pixels and these pixels are already selected. And if I try to add this area to an area that's already selected, I don't see anything happen. But if I start from inside what I already have selected and then start to carefully draw and add to the selection, this tool works freehand, so whatever you select, that's where it's selecting. And then when I get back, I'm going to release, and it added it to the selection. This area, I don't want to have this area as part of my selection. I want to remove it from my area. So with the lasso tool still selected, now I will hold down the Option or Alt key, and a minus sign will show up. That means I will be taking away. I can't take away something from something I don't have. So again, I'm going to start from in here, or out here, and I'm going to carefully draw along this area, this line of contrast. Come back out and loop it around, and now it is not part of my selection. I can always go back in and clean up. So I encourage you to try this again and make some mistakes that you can correct for yourself. Go ahead and zoom back out. I'm going to do a Command 0 so I can see the whole page. And I want to place this object over here. But I want to do it on a new layer that is not included as part of my background. To do that, I can cut and paste this object. So I can go to the Edit menu and cut, which is Command or Control X. I always imagine the X as scissors, and that's how it helps me remember. So I'm going to do a Command X, and it cuts it away from my background layer. And I'm going to paste it, and that's Command or Control V as in Victor. So now it always by default places an object in the middle of your page. Now this is on its own layer. If you look over at your layers panel, you'll see that you have an object all by itself. It's really hard to see, and it's difficult to zoom into that. But it is not part of this background layer. It's on its own layer. So let's rename this. And to do that, we're going to double click on the layer name, and we're going to name it Egg. And we're going to move the egg. So we grab our Move tool. I'm hitting the V key, and we'll move it to over here. Now my egg is like snapping. See how it's like not really letting me go where I want to go? What I can do is go up to the View menu and go down to where it says Snap and turn snapping off, and now it's much more fluid. Snapping's helpful when you need to align things to guides or other objects. It's important to note that currently we have the egg layer active. It became active because we pasted to this layer. The background layer is separate. If we turn off visibility for the egg layer, the egg disappears. The next object we're going to select is the corn, but currently the egg layer is selected and the corn does not exist on the egg layer. So let's make sure that the background layer is selected by clicking anywhere in the gray area. So the corn has an interesting texture and shape. It's not quite, I mean, if I were to go with the magnetic lasso, it would take me forever to get each one of these kernels. And if I were to go with the elliptical marquee, well, it's not round and it's also not rectangular. So we have several other options. Let's go to the fourth tool down, which is the Object Selection tool. If you click and hold down on it, within there, there's a tool called the Quick Selection tool. Go ahead and select that. The Quick Selection tool makes selections based on color. The center of the cursor will be your sample color, and all the colors within the circle are additional sampled colors or a color range. Go ahead and click anywhere on the corn to select it, and use your Move tool to move it to its a new place and deselect. Next up is to import or bring in the carrots, which is where this tutorial changes a little bit from the original footage that we've been looking at. So to bring in that file of the carrots, which you have also received, you're going to go up to the File menu and go down to Place Embedded and Place Linked. So both of these options are how you will bring in a file from another document into here. And essentially what these two options do is bring in files non-destructively, meaning that their original file lives somewhere and does not get touched. Then you bring it in here and you can do a whole bunch of stuff to it, but it doesn't change the original. The difference between Place Embedded and Place Linked is that Place Embedded, once you bring it in, well, now that connection to its original file is not exactly linked. It's embedded, it's placed into your document. The difference between that and linked means that, like, if I were to go and change the carrots in the original document, when I look at it here, it will get updated. Whereas embedded may not update. However, I have found that through history, it does update. So you just have to make sure that you rasterize that object when you bring it in. So both of these, like I said, do essentially the same thing, and it brings things in as smart objects, non-destructive files. So I'm going to Place Embedded. And I'm going to navigate to my carrots, my PNG file, and bring that in and click Place. Now, the first thing that happens is that it brings it in my case, full screen, and it gives me a commit changes or cancel changes option at the top. I haven't done anything to it, but I do want to change the size of this. So I want to shrink them down a little bit. So I'm going to bring my cursor to a corner. And when I bring my cursor to a corner, it gives me, well, you'll see that around this whole object, you have an X through the middle and a box around it. And that box is called a bounding box. So the bounding box has 4 corners and it has 4 sides. So 8 anchor points around the outside. And then there's one that we don't really see, which is in the center. So 9 altogether. So if I hover over a corner, I can scale this object down. And you'll see that in this latest version of Photoshop that it stays proportional. If I hold down my Shift key while I do that, so right now I'm holding down my Shift key, I can take it out of proportion. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to undo. And so now it's back in scale. So I want to bring it and place it in this area on the crate. So I can also move this object. You see, as soon as I bring my cursor inside the bounding box, it becomes the move tool. So I can move it, and I'm just going to keep shrinking it down. And I'll bring it over here. So this is about the middle of where I want it, but I want it much smaller. So I'm going to shrink it down by holding on a corner and dragging, but I'm also going to hold down my Option key. So the Option key will allow me to scale it uniformly from the center. Much like when we made our selection of our orange, we drew out from the center using the Option key. Here, if I want to scale from the center, I hold my Option key down. So I'm going to move it into place, and I want to place it somewhere that my shadow for it will not interrupt any of my other objects, and it's not too close to the edge. So I'll just place it over here. The size that you create is up to you, but you do want it to kind of fill in this area, not too large. We don't want it to be covering the sides of the crate. That wouldn't make any sense. So we want to make it sure that it does fit in this space nicely. Not too small, not too big, but proportional. You are also welcome to rotate it. So if you want to bring your cursor to a corner and go outside the corner, you'll see you get a rounded arrow, and that allows you to rotate it. So if you want to change the position of it, you are welcome to do so. I have it where I want it. To make it stop moving, you know, when I go to click, it moves. To get it to stop that and get rid of this bounding box, I hit the Commit Changes button up at the top. And now it's in here. Now also, I have a new layer, and it is called carrots. The reason it's called carrots is because it remembers the name of the file. And then also, you'll see that it's got this little symbol in the bottom right corner of its layer, which indicates that it is a smart object. If I were to double click on this, it would open up the carrots file. The next step, you'll notice that everything has a shadow, but this one does not. So we're going to create a shadow. The way that we create the shadow is not the way that I did it for you on these other objects. We're going to attach the shadow to the carrots. So let's go down to the carrots layer and double click anywhere in the gray area, and it will bring up the layer style dialog box. The layer style dialog box has a bunch of different styles for us to choose from, and we're going to go down to drop shadow. Now if I just click on this check box, now I've applied a drop shadow. You can see this drop shadow is applied, but where it says blending options is a lighter gray. And over here in this area of the dialog box, you'll see that it says blending options. So I want to see the options for drop shadow. That means I have to click on this area to make it light gray. And now you can see that it's contextual to drop shadow, and it says drop shadow here. So I'm going to look at my object and also the crate and decide how close it is to the crate, to the surface, and how the angle of that shadow is applied. So the pointer on this is pointing to the light source. So we've already analyzed that the light source is kind of off to the right. So I'm just going to move this over here, and maybe it may be a little up. There we go. And I'm also going to change the color of the shadow because I can see it's a little grayer than these. Let me zoom up on that a little bit. So I was just holding down my space bar and command key. And I'm going to change that color. Typically it is black. I didn't reset my preferences. So typically it's black. What I want to do is make it a darker shade of the crate, right? That's what the shadow would be. So I'm going to bring my cursor outside of this color picker. This is called the color picker. When I click on any swatch of color, it brings up the color picker. And I'm going to sample the color of the crate, but shadows are darker than that. So I'm going to add some gray or black to it and bring that down. So it's not quite a neutral gray, which would be black or white and the shades in between. It has a little bit of this orangey yellow in it. And I can tell that in here because this is a neutral gray and this looks a little different. All right, so I'm happy with that. And I'll say, okay, now I can decide how opaque I want that or transparent. How far the distance is from it. So how far is that surface? So I imagine it's pretty close. How much does that spread? And what's the size of it? So you play around with this to decide what is appropriate for you. Once you're happy with your shadow, click OK. And you'll see that it has applied an effect to this layer, and that effect is a drop shadow. If you don't want to see it, turn off the eyeball. You can have a whole bunch of effects in here, and then clicking on effects would hide it. The next tool we will explore is the Polygonal Lasso tool. Go to the Lasso flyout, click and hold down, and select Polygonal Lasso. The Polygonal Lasso tool allows you to make straight-lined selections at any angle. Zoom in on the bread. To use the Polygonal Lasso tool, you plot individual points where an angle or a corner will take place. So since this is a rounded object, I'm continually clicking, and you'll notice that the cursor stays attached, but it doesn't mark anything until you click. Also, if you look at the options bar, you'll notice that it says anti-alias and it is selected. Remember, pixels are on a grid, but many of these objects are curved, Photoshop needs to calculate how you want that to be applied. So anti-aliasing, try to attempt to curve those dancing ants. That selection. Move the bread to its shadow. I'm holding down the Command key or Control key on a PC. Deselect when finished. The next object we're going to select is the garlic, which is hidden behind my navigator. So I'm going to shrink up my navigator. This object is a difficult one to select. Let me zoom in on it. It has colors that are very similar to the background, and it's an object that's made out of fabric or felt, so it has a fuzzy edge, and Photoshop doesn't really read it really sharply. So in this case, a tool such as the Object Selection tool works very well. So I'm going to click and drag a lasso, a rectangular lasso, around the garlic and release. And it did a great selection. I'm not quite pleased with over here, but this is a curve, and curves can be selected using the Elliptical Marquee tool. So I'm going to select the Elliptical Marquee tool, and I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and I'm going to add to this selection. As I start to click and drag, I'm going to hold down my space bar, which allows me to move this into place, and I'll just select these few pixels. I'm going to add even more. And so that's a fine selection. Just to play it safe, I'm going to put the garlic on its own layer. So I'm going to do a cut and paste, Command or Control X, and then zoom back out and Command or Control V. It is on its own layer called Layer 1. I'm going to rename this garlic by double clicking on the layer's name. Now, using the Move tool, because it is the only object on the garlic layer, it will allow me to move this. If I attempted to move the background layer, I would get an error message. Now I need a few more copies of this. To make additional copies, but keeping them all on the garlic layer, what I'm going to do is select this object. To select the object, or select the pixels that exist on this layer alone, if I turn off visibility for background layer and egg, you can see that I can see the transparency grid behind it. So I'm going to turn that back on. But I wanted you to see that those are the only pixels that are on this layer. There is the option to select just the pixels that are on a layer. To do that, I'm going to either right click or control click on a Mac and select pixels. And now the garlic is selected. To make a duplicate of this and keeping it on the same layer, I'm going to hold down my Option or Alt key, and you'll see that my Move tool, you should have the Move tool selected. When I have the Option key held down with that, it becomes a caret with like a ghost caret, which means you're going to be making a clone. So I'm going to click and drag, and I'm dragging out a clone. When I release, I can make another copy. I'm going to click and drag and deselect when I'm finished. And so now, turning off visibility for the other layers, I can see that the garlic is alone on its layer. The next object we're going to select are these two halves of apples. And we're going to do something kind of cool with them. We're going to change the color of them to make them red apples. And to do this, we're going to put all of this on a new layer. Go ahead and go to the toolbar and select Rectangular Marquee tool. The Rectangular Marquee tool allows us to make squares and rectangles. So park your cursor at one of the corners and click and drag to the diagonal corner and release your mouse button. Cut and paste this from the background layer. So select the background layer, cut and paste. And let's name this layer Apples. Move it back to where it was. We're going to not just separate these apples from the red background. I'm going to turn off visibility for everything else so you can see that the apples are alone on this layer. And if I use my move tool, I can move them around, but I do want to have that aligned basically pretty much where it was. What we're going to do is select these alone, and then we're going to apply our color adjustment layer to them. So let's first select the apples. There is another method to make selections based on color. If we go over to the toolbar, in the fourth tool down where the object selection tool is, click and hold down and select the magic wand tool. The magic wand tool makes selections based on color and color range. So if I select this yellow, that is the base yellow that I'm selecting, and based in the options bar on what the tolerance says, that is going to select within a color range of 32 degrees from the color I select, and contiguous checked, meaning touching. When I click, it selects all the colors that is within that range of 32. If I add to that selection by holding down my shift key, I can get a little bit more, but it's not really getting everything. So I'm going to increase this tolerance to 50, and I'm going to deselect and try it again. And this time I'm going to turn off contiguous. By turning off contiguous, it will also select this apple. And holding down my shift key, and I'm clicking on more pixels. And this just keeps adding more and more colors to my selection. So now I have a pretty good selection of my apples, and I want to make this red background disappear. Since these are selected, Photoshop has this option to make a layer mask. So if I click on this, what that does is it adds this thumbnail that looks like it's black with 2 white dots in it. And what that is showing me is that wherever it is black, it is hiding or concealing the background or concealing the other objects. Wherever it is white, it is revealing. So if I want to see what this looks like without the mask applied, I hold down the shift key and I click on it, and you can see an X goes through this. If I hold down the shift key and I click on it again, it hides it again. If I want to see what this mask looks like, I can hold down the option key and click on it, and that's what my mask looks like. When I click on it again with the option key, I see it regular again. So I'm going to zoom back out and turn on visibility for background. So what I want to do is move the apples to over here. So grabbing my move tool, I click and drag the apples over here. Like I said earlier, we want to change these to red apples. To do that, we're going to apply something called an adjustment layer. Go over to your properties panel set, and there's a tab for adjustments. Click on that. Within here, we have a set of adjustments which kind of act like filters. And this first one in the second row is called the Hue Saturation Adjustment. Go ahead and click on that. What that has done is it has added a layer mask, which is all white, which means that the color adjustments that I make are going to show through this entire canvas. And this icon means adjustment. So let's look up here at the hue slider, saturation, and lightness. Hue changes color. Hue is a fancy word for color. Saturation is how much the intensity of a color is. When you have no intensity of color, it takes all the color out. When I add a lot of saturation, it becomes quite intense and very saturated. Lightness is how much light or white and how much dark or black. Let's move the hue slider and watch your apples. Now the problem is that it's not just my apples changing color, but the background as well. To make it so that this only affects the layer that is below it, we want to clip this layer to the apples layer. I go up to the properties panel and I click this icon, which is the clip icon. And now you can see that the color is only applying to the apples. You can see the apples are underlined and there's a down arrow. The next object we're going to select is the oven mitt. So go ahead and select the background layer and zoom in on the oven mitt. To select this, let's use the Object Selection tool. The Object Selection tool is located in the flyout for the magic wand. Click and hold down the Shift plus the W key to cycle through the different tools. For this one, let's make sure that we select within the black area, but also including the loop. It made a pretty good selection. However, it also selected the black within the loop, the background. We don't want this included. To get rid of it, we know something that will take away based on color, which is the Magic Wand tool. So I'm clicking and holding down and going to the Magic Wand tool, and I'm going to drop this tolerance down to maybe 20. And then I'm turning on contiguous because I don't want it to deselect or select any of this area. And then I carefully go over and hold down my Option key to take away from the selection. And I have a minus sign next to my cursor. Let's see if you can see it better there. And I'm going to click inside there. So now that is not included in my selection. Cut and paste this to its own layer. And zoom out. Rename the layer Oven Mitt. Move the oven mitt using the Move tool or the V key to about where it belongs. And you'll notice that there's an issue. It's not at the right angle and it's a little small. So we're going to transform this shape. To transform, we're going to go to the Edit menu and go down about midway to Free Transform or Command T. This will put a bounding box around the object. The bounding box has a middle point that you can't see and 8 other anchor points around the edges. As you bring your cursor near any of these anchor points, you'll see that it may change shape. If you hover it right over a corner, you'll be scaling it. And if you hold down the Shift key, you can take it out of proportion. If you hover your mouse outside a corner, you can rotate it. And if you bring your cursor inside, it turns into the Move tool caret and you can move it into place. So go ahead and play around with this and resize it that it fits on the shadow. Commit your changes when you're done from the options bar. Turn on visibility for all your layers and check out the work you've done. There's one thing left to do, and that's to fill the background with this pattern. We're going to make it into a tablecloth. To do this, let's select the crate and cut and paste it onto its own layer. So select the background layer, use your Rectangular Marquee tool, and select the crate. Drag from one corner to the other. Cut and paste. And move it into place. The next step is to rename your layer Crate. The next step is to take a sample of the pixels on this portion of the image and make it into a pattern. I'm going to zoom in on this area. The way that Photoshop makes patterns is based on a grid. So we need to make a selection that is rectangular in shape. So I'm going to grab my Rectangular Marquee tool and make sure that my background layer is selected. And I'm going to make a selection in the middle of a red square to another middle of any red square. And release my mouse button. I'm going to use this as my sample area to make this pattern. Once I have this area selected, I'm going to go to the Edit menu and select Define Pattern. And I'm going to name it Tablecloth. And say OK. Then I'm going to deselect. I'm going to zoom out, Command 0 to see my whole screen. And then I'm going to go to the Select menu and say Select All. So now the dancing ants are along the edges of the entire canvas. That means the entire canvas is selected. Now I'm going to fill this area with my new pattern. Go to the Edit menu and select Fill. From Contents, we're going to change this to Pattern. And then we're going to go to where it says Custom Pattern and this drop menu. And if you scroll down, you should find your tablecloth at the very bottom. Say OK. So now, if you look at your layers, you'll see that if you turn off visibility for each of the individual layers, that the tablecloth is on the background layer. And deselect. The next thing we're going to do is crop this image so it's not so large. I'm going to go back over to the toolbar and select the crop tool. It's the 5th tool down. The crop tool will resize your image. So we're going to grab a corner and just bring it in a little bit. And as you grab each corner, you'll see that your cropping area is getting shaded. So this shaded area will be deleted when we hit the Commit Changes button. As you can see, it says Delete Crop Pixels. We can deselect that, and when we commit the changes, if we decide to go back and crop again, I click on it and my pixels are still there, so I haven't deleted anything. But if I click on Delete Crop Pixels, they'll go away. Let's say I want to make this a perfect square. I can go to this drop menu where it says Ratio and make it a 1:1 square. That doesn't mean 1 inch, it's just any unit. So that will remain a square no matter how I try to click and drag. And I can move my cropping area around as well. There are many presets. You can also change not just the width and the height, but also the resolution by changing how many pixels per inch an object is. This is currently 300 pixels per inch, and I can see that down here. The original image is 10 inches wide by 5.987 inches tall. If I change this to 10 inches by 10 inches and make it 150 pixels per inch. When cropping, try to leave as much of the vertical space as you can. So go to the edges. We are going to make it 10 inches by 10 inches. And try to center this, maybe a little bit on the higher end, because you can see it is closer to the top of the page than it is the bottom, because we're going to also be placing your name down here using text. So commit your changes. You can see that on my rulers, this is 10 inches and over here is 10 inches. The 0 point is at the top left corner. I can change that location by clicking and dragging from the corner of where the two rulers meet. And wherever I release, that will be the new 0 point. Double clicking will take it back to zeroing out at the top left corner of your canvas. Okay, so now let's zoom in so that we can see this bottom right corner. And we're going to be placing our text right around the center of the crate and filling to the edge of the crate, but just in this area. Now it's hard for you to see because I have my background on. So I'm going to turn off visibility for the tablecloth layer just so that we can see a little bit better. And I'm going to grab my type tool. So the type tool works in a couple different ways. One way is you can single click and start typing, and it will continue to type. If you wanted to write a paragraph, it would just be one long continuous line. If you want to write within a paragraph, then you would create a text box. So to create a text box, I take the type tool and I click and drag a marquee where I want my text to be. And it will fill it with what we call placeholder text. Placeholder text is also sometimes called lorem ipsum. So I don't want it to say this. I want it to have my name and then also the name of our class and things like that. So I'm going to type in my name. Then I'm going to hit return so that I can write Mac 280 or 290, whichever class you are in, what section number you are in, 01 or 02, and also what semester this is. So in this case, it is fall 2021. Now the text is a little small for my taste, so what I'm going to do is highlight my text, and up here in the options bar you can see what the font style name is. This is the style. Currently it is regular. I'm going to switch that to bold, and I'm going to increase my font size a little bit. To do that, I can either select from the drop menu, I can type in a number here, or I can also hover my mouse over these T's, the small t and large t, and you'll see it turns into a hand with a double-sided arrow, and as I click and drag, it will increase or decrease the font size. So I'm going to increase it to a point where it reaches the bottom of my text box. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to commit my changes and then turn visibility back on for my tablecloth or my background layer. Save your work as your name. Underscore making selections .psd. Also, export a copy, File, Export as, and save it as a JPEG. Go to File Settings, Format, JPEG, at 100% quality, export. Submit to Canvas.